So welcome everyone. My name is Manish Jain. I'm from Udaipur, India, and I'm very thrilled to welcome you to this event for World Localization Day. Today we have three speakers: Camilla Moreno, Chris Smaje, and Daniel Wahl, along with Helena Norberg-Hodge, and we will spend about 30 minutes listening to and reflections from Helena, and then open up for questions and answers. So I just ask everybody to remain muted throughout this live session. If you have any questions, you can please type them into the Q&A box. There's a window, there's a box near in the bottom of your Zoom setting, you'll see near the chat box icon. And at the start of your question, please type your name and where you are from along with your question. And there's a difference between the Q&A window and the chat box. They're two different things. If you're sharing thoughts in the chat box, please make sure you change the setting to all attendees and not just the panelists, so everyone can see. So with that, I want to welcome everyone and invite Helena maybe to say a few words about this session today.
You're muted, Helena.
Yeah, in this opening session, we're hoping to sort of go across the broad spectrum that we deal with in local futures, which is to warn people of the trajectory that unfortunately most governments are pursuing, very much pushed by global banks and corporations that are essentially pulling the whole world in the direction of a very energy-intensive, technology-intensive, urban future. On the other side, around the world, there's a bottom-up movement, very often led by women, which is trying to rebuild the community fabric, the deeper connections to nature. There's actually trying to withdraw from the intense competition and the waste and pollution of the dominant consumer culture to respect diversity, biological diversity and cultural diversity. And this is structurally the path that is supported by rebuilding local economies. So today we're going to be hearing from Camilla, who will be looking at that big picture corporate direction primarily, and then from Daniel, who's going to be looking at the need to support regenerative cultures. And then finally from Chris, talking about a small farm future. For us, the shift in the food economy is the most important and the central shift that we all should be doing everything we can to support. And I want to thank Manish very much for chairing this session, and really all of you who are speaking, thank you, and all of you who've come to listen, many thanks. I hope you will all do what you can to help spread the word about World Localization Day. Thank you.
Thanks, Helena. So this session is called Coming Back to Life. So I'm really excited to, here things are just starting to again open up in India. So we're really excited for this session, man. And to start us off, we'll have Camilla Moreno. Camilla is a very dear friend. She's a researcher and activist working with social movements in Brazil and Latin America on the social and environmental dimensions of biotechnology, agribusiness expansion, and climate politics. And she is, I've known Camilla for many years, and every time I hear Camilla, I feel my whole world is shaken, and everything I thought was the way forward, it gets redefined and reimagined with Camilla. So welcome, Camilla. We have about 10 minutes for your opening round.
Okay, thank you for your kind words, Manish. hard to put everything that I would like to share in 10 minutes, but I'm gonna try to do this like compressed pill, no, of at least my perspective. So what's going on in the world? No, as Manish said, some places are opening up, but although we can have a reality in our daily lives that can be slightly changing from the past year incarceration, no, and everything that has been going on, it's not that clear as the smoke screen of all this, what this pandemic, which is very real, you know, has imposed on our sense of understanding this critical juncture in history we are going through. So I would start saying that we are in the mid of a change of epoch. And this in history, this is something very deep, you know, it's a cut. There is a worldview and the way that society is organized before and after. I'm used to have this reference, ACDC, that means like before Christ and after Christ, is more or less the kind of division of time that we are witnessing right now. So last year, a lot of very important meetings were skipped and canceled because of the pandemic. You know, it was a gap year, the 2020. So 2021 became a compressed year for global environmental governance. That is for the key meetings of overarching structures where our multilateral system, where our nation states and key, all the agencies, you know, out of the United Nations are defining what we as humanity are going with a shared plans and a shared vision. So second semesters, we will have the CBD, the Convention of Biological Diversity meeting in China. We will have the United Nations Food System Summit, which is like one of a kind. And we will have in November in UK, the UNFCCC, the Climate Convention meeting, to finally finalize the last missing piece of the Paris Agreement, of what is called the rule book of the Paris Agreement, and that concerns the Article 6 and concerns how carbon markets are going to function. So the second semester is packed with major decisions that are going to lay and pave the way ahead of how the next decade, this decade and the next decade are going to unfold, because it's going to define a legal framework and a consensus forging a road ahead. So what is at stake? We are witnessing that within all those parallel and convergent processes that are going on in international level, and then afterwards we see them being translated into national policies, we see the advance of a twin strategy, which is the decarbonization, because this is the overarching political mandate, even for the left and for the progressive people. You know, you have to decarbonize the economy, whatever that means. And this can only be done through accelerating the digital transformation. So the first thing that is very important for you to remember, that I want to emphasize here, is that decarbonization and digitalization are one and only and the same process. You know, it's a twin strategy. From what we can talk, looking of the very concrete points that the European Green Deal has launched, was announced last year, we see now more recently the proposed of the major framework for infrastructure that has been announced by Biden, and also last week the G7 meeting that also took place in UK about this global infrastructure plan. So it's like all forces, nation states and its corporate entities are pushing the narrative and naturalizing that there is no future different than this one that is being designed. And we have agreed and I find it so contradictory that our social movements actually are demanding in the street for this strategy to move forward, that we are in the process of aligning the global economies under a synchronized circular one world system. You know, the so-called NDCs, the national determined contributions, that is how climate action is defined in countries and presented to the UN, so everybody knows how far we are from closing the carbon gap. It's all about planning the economy. A lot of people criticize the Chinese government for having these 5-year plans, but actually we are all walking towards this dystopic, cybernetic, at least in theory, attempt to control production, demand, and let the corporations and all this new science of consumer behavior, of big data, define, you know, what are going to be the cycles of the global economy. And I cannot stress enough how incompatible this vision is from local economies, from autonomies, from regenerative strategies from the bottom, because either we have this overarching plan where we all need to fit under, or we build autonomously and respecting cultural differences and in a democratic fashion what we want for the future. So we have like this two divergent ways. But we are hostages of this overall rationality that I have been a critic for many years of what I call the carbon metrics. How the complexity of the current climate and environmental crisis, which it is real, has been hijacked by this monomolecule, like the monocultures. We can only think and talk and project our actions making reference to one master molecule that becomes a conversion rate because we have carbon equivalents, that then we tell the narrative, we tell the story. In fact, it is very effective as a storytelling device that once carbon is solved, all our other problems are going to fall into place. So I criticize this. I emphasize that we must remember that carbon metrics, it's politically created. Somebody defined it, some technocrat elite and corporate elite defined that we needed one piece of reference to make a reverse engineering of our economy. And this is what carbon is all about. I'm just gonna mention here an example of how damaging this kind of thinking is, because the Food System Summit that is going to take place this year, we have a pre-summit in Rome in July, and we have the summit in September or October, if I don't recall correctly, along with the UN General Assembly. There is a major new agenda on the block, like the new kids on the block, a new agenda on the block, which is address global diets, not fossil fuel production, but global diets as the key culprit on relating to climate change, global warming, and carbon emission. Yes, we all agree that industrial monocultures are the main driver of deforestation. I can say this from Brazil and from most of the southern countries. Of course, in dairy production is a major global industry, corporate control, full of problems. But the point is, there are few people connected with the big tech, financed by this fictitious money created by financial capital that is speculated in the global casino, that now wants to profit out of a major shift in global diets. And of course, they want to control the diets, they want to standardize the diets, and they want to embed in the new food, I'm calling it food 4.0, you know, all different kinds of new patents and new technologies related to synthetic biology, gene editing, connection with the personalized nutrition. I mean, tons of things that are going to be presented to the world as something to save the climate, but actually is to encapsulate in food the vision of the world we are heading towards. So what is this vision of this world we are heading towards? This is the transhuman future. I'm very worried, and I really think we need to discuss and started to address systematically this whole belief structure and ideology that is called singularity. The idea and the belief that between 2030, 2050, more or less around 2040 something, technology will be in such an advanced stage that through artificial intelligence, humans will be obsolete in the need of fostering this advance. Technology will give birth to itself. It's going to be an autonomous force that is going to run the world. So in this very weird place called Silicon Valley, because those ideas, they do not come from everywhere. They have an address. They have a history when they started. We had since the 50s and the 60s, this fusion of academic research, science, and the military-industrial complex in the United States. And this has, of course, spread all over the world. It has gone to China. And now the biggest geopolitical struggle we see is, in fact, the G7 itself, competing with China. Who is going to run this mega AI infrastructure connected with the 5G deployment, with what is called the Internet of Things, and in a not so distant future, what they foresee as the Internet of Bodies. So the dystopic vision that is becoming more and more every day clear if you follow the cues, is that once they suggest, oh, we are going to give you a bracelet, a health and wellness bracelet, so we can address obesity and help poor people to change their diets. Actually, we are tying the bodies. It's, of course, it's a much more complex issue, but we are tying human bodies to this whole new, brave new world of the biopolitical and the assets that they are going to invest. And when I say they, I mean all this corporate financial capital that is circulating out there and can pay, can invest, can buy narratives, can pay salaries for people, can actually move this narrative on. So just to end, I want to stress another point that as we think over this major shift and what kind of future a very small elite of people are setting for the entirety of humanity, and that is presented under the fourth industrial revolution, the Great Reset, etc., etc. We get mistaken and deluded around this Anthropocene term. While it's made to appear that, oh, we are now in the age of humans and we need to take the challenge to reverse the damage we have done. In fact, there's nothing more misleading than refer to our age as the Anthropocene. We're actually walking fast towards post-human age, towards a trans-human age, and towards renegating everything that means to be human. And so the Local Futures program and the localization and the ancient future agenda, that is something that for Helena is very dear. I truly believe there is right now a tour de force for us to build coalitions and to start to challenge together this major narrative. So I would stop here on this first side.
Thank you, Camilla. Touched on so many things, and we wove them together so beautifully in so little time. So thank you for that opening remarks. I would now like to invite Daniel. So Daniel Wahl is the author of Designing Regenerative Cultures. He works as an educator, consultant, and activist on bioregional regeneration as a strategy for localization and the redesign of the human impact on Earth. And this is my first time I'm meeting Daniel, though I've heard his name many times, and we have lots of common friends. So it's really wonderful to meet you here, Daniel. Welcome, and the floor is open to you.
Thank you, Manish. We actually spent time at FinTron together at the New Story Summit.
Yes, awesome.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for the invitation, and just thank you so much for even putting on this event, because it's really vital. And you were not lying, Manish. Camilla was on fire, and my heart's beating faster for what she shared with us. Thank you, Camilla, for that opening. Yeah, in many ways, this session is called Coming Back to Life. And we've just heard from Camilla perfectly that we now have a critical choice, which is, are we coming back to life, or are we buying into this ridiculous narrative that somehow nature and culture are separate, that somehow we can overcome the very fact that we're biological beings? And if you don't believe it, try not to breathe for the next 15 minutes. If you're still there, then we can have a conversation about transhumanism and all those kind of things. We are deeply dependent on breathing the oxygen that millions of years of life have provided in this atmosphere. This planet has been evolving for 3.8 billion years into a more and more able to support life planetary process, which is life is a planetary process. And in many ways, when people ask what's a regenerative community or what's a regenerative culture, you can define life as exactly that. Life is a regenerative community on nested scales. It links the local to the regional to the global in what Thich Nhat Hanh so beautifully called interbeing, in interdependence. And we now have a choice to say we're on a planet in crisis that we have caused. We have climate crisis, cascading biodiversity loss, and ecosystems collapse. I'm not going to go into the detail. We're all familiar with it. We're at the brink of a species level rite of passage. Either we believe the story of the technology dystopia that is being sold as a utopia, or we come back to life. Who would you like to be guided by if a planet is in crisis? By artificial intelligence or by natural intelligence? We need to choose between those two. It's an NIAI choice. And natural intelligence is about listening to how life during billions of years has sustained life and made the planet more livable. As Janine Benyus, founder of the Biomimicry Institute, likes to put it, life creates conditions conducive to life. And the deepest change we need to do is to come back into the narrative that we are life. Again, rightly so, as we face such destruction, now the interest in regenerative this, regenerative that, culture, development, all of that is growing. And it's really important to point out that this is not something new, that this is a coming back to how our species, for probably about 98% of its history, has lived in deep connection with the ecosystems we inhabited in regenerative patterns, because we knew that we were dependent on the community of life that brought us forth. It's a fundamental shift in self-perception away from the separation of nature and culture to understanding that if we want to address these converging crises, we need to look at our potential as life to create conditions conducive to life. And my friend Bill Reed from Regenesis Group once said to me, which just sort of put a thinking into place, he said, you cannot save the planet, you can only save places. And this is what World Localization Day is all about. We need to understand that the idea that we can solve global problems by abstraction to then come up with these ridiculous frameworks built on the carbon myopia Camilla was talking about, everything down to just one measurement of carbon. And then almost presenting carbon as the villain, where carbon is actually the basis of all life, and you just want it in the right place. We need to come back into understanding that the only way that we can bring forth this human potential of not being a degenerative, but being a regenerative presence on Earth, because that's what it's really all about. We have a window of opportunity of the next couple of decades to redesign the human impact on Earth, and particularly to redesign the impact of a very small part of humanity on Earth, because it still continues to be very few of us that create most of the damage. And to be transparent, I'm probably among them as well. I need to name my own privileges of being a white middle-class male and all that. But if we remember that all our indigenous brothers and sisters have carried an understanding of relationship to place that was not this place belongs to us, but we belong to this place. And our job is to become a healing, regenerative expression of place again. To come home to life is to come home to place. The poet Gary Snyder called this re-inhabitation. It's the core concept of bioregional development. How do we re-inhabit our regions to become healing presences in the ecosystems we inhabit? And the UN Decade for Ecosystems Restoration gives us an opportunity to use this platform of conversation to put a focus on how can we bring local food economies home, build local food sovereignty in a region, and through this process build capacity again for agriculture, for more regenerative agriculture and centrophic agriculture, food forests, reversing the damage of the last 5,000 to 8,000 years of agriculture, and greening the planet through productive agroforestry systems that give us local employment, local circular economies based on biomaterials, local food sovereignty. By planting water, by bringing back the forest, we bring back local water cycles, and we bring back water management to the region. So it's food sovereignty is followed by water sovereignty. It needs local energy, renewable energy sovereignty. So we need to decentralize our energy infrastructure. But really, all these technical changes will fall into place if we change the narrative more into understanding ourselves as healing expressions of place and that's why it's wonderful that this opening session is called Coming Back to Life, the wonderful work of Joanna Macy of decades of trying to remind us that we're just participants in a community that needs our capabilities to now meet the damage that we have created in the immature phase of our evolution. So for me, the major jump now is to come back into understanding that we have all the tools in place to regionalize and relocalize the way we meet human needs, and that is actually the most diverse way of building climate resilience, building resilience to all these uncertain futures. And it's not the global system that will save us. Yes, we need global collaboration between bioregions. We need global innovation and exchange and support. We still need to address centuries of colonialization and unfair inequality on the planet that has been created by a systematic process. But the place where we can all act today is in our communities, and the best entry point is food, water, and energy sovereignty. And I'll leave it at that, and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you. I didn't have to be the boogeyman with the time board or buzzer, so thank you for that. So our third speaker for the day is Chris Smaje. Chris is a small-scale farmer in Somerset and a writer on agriculture and environmental issues. He is the author of A Small Farm Future, and he frequently blogs as well. So we're really excited to hear Chris, and it's over to you, Chris.
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, it's a real privilege to be on this panel, and you know, nothing more important than the topics we're talking about. And that was a great lead-in from Daniel in terms of small-scale, local food farming, water systems. So I'll do my best to speak to that. I mean, I guess for the last 20 odd years, I've been living on a small farm here in Somerset in the west of England. So my focus is very much a sort of ground up agricultural, or as I'll go on to say, perhaps horticultural more than agricultural. But that's very much cuts against the kind of larger systems that we've been hearing about. You know, we have this current global industrial food system, which is based on very high levels of energy input, very highly capitalized, and very highly productive of actually a very small number, really it's just a handful of global commodity crops. Something like 75% of global cropland is devoted to just 10 crops, most of which are cereals and grain legumes. So, I mean, you know, they're great crops. They produce sort of calories and protein in very effectively. But we've kind of got stuck in what I call, you know, trapped in what I call an arable corner in my book, that we've just become so over-reliant on this handful of very mechanizable, processable, tradable, transportable crops. And it seems to me a good idea to try and transcend that. It was fascinating hearing Camilla talking about this this kind of digital singularity. I don't know how things are going to go. That certainly is one possibility, but it seems to me we're facing such a huge set of crises around climate and water and energy futures that those sorts of visions may well kind of, you know, explode in the faces of you know, of all of us, or the people that are supporting it. And really we need to prepare for that and go to a much lower energy, lower capital input, more local type of farming. The ecological economist Tim Jackson, in his book Prosperity Without Growth, argued that we really need to be investing in low carbon, labor intensive sectors of the economy, and nothing can be more low carbon, if we get it right, and labor intensive than agriculture. So it's really critical, I think, that we rethink the way that we're doing agriculture globally. So we need to look for a more local agriculture, more labor intensive, and equally important, more skill intensive. And that, I think, takes us towards the sort of diversity that Daniel was talking about, more of a sort of gardening than a farming vision, more horticultural, much more emphasis on fruit and vegetables, which, you know, in wealthy countries like the UK, we tend to import, you know, any you know, basically the system pushes you towards the sort of cheapest option, and energy is cheap, human labor is dear. So we kind of export the responsibility to produce the healthy food, the fruit and vegetables, to other countries. You know, that's got to change. We've got to embrace that locally everywhere. And arguably that type of farming can be more nature friendly. It can be high yielding. You know, if you get it right, the best local diverse horticultural systems can be just as high yielding and as the kind of large scale industrial agriculture. But actually, I think output per acre measured by calories or protein or money, or output per worker, is not really the key question that we're going to be facing in the future. The key question we're going to be facing is basically, how can my locality meet its food and fiber needs in a congenial way? And I think small scale, local, labor intensive and skills intensive farming can be the answer to that. It can, if we get it right, be the closest approximation we're ever going to get to heaven on earth. But it can be hell on earth as well. And which one of those it isn't really an ecological or an agronomic question. It's basically a social question. You know, it's a question of how we build human relationships, how we relate to each other. And I guess I've spent a lot of time over the years debating with so-called eco-modernists or sort of techno-utopians, not sure that that debate always sort of ends up being terribly productive. But there's a kind of modernist narrative which really jumps on any notion of peasant farming or sort of rural rural idyls. You know, it's very, very attuned to that kind of tradition of rural romanticism, which is fair enough up to a point. You know, there is a danger of over romanticizing the local. But I think that tradition is far too easy on sort of technological romanticism, on urban romanticism. And part of me thinks that almost it kind of protests too much. It's almost like there's this anxiety that if people really realized how easy it was to get along together, to produce food together, to you know, to solve their own problems locally, then you know, all of these kind of terrifying technological things coming down the pipe that, that Camilla was talking about will actually prove to be redundant. So I think in trying to flesh out that possibility, that alternative, there's an awful lot that we can learn. You know, every part of the world has got a local tradition, usually of mixed low energy input, diverse, sustainable farming. We can learn from those traditions. It doesn't mean we have to replicate them exactly in every single detail, but we can learn from historical traditions of rural and peasant societies. And generally, you know, what you find very often is that those societies very subtly combine ways of managing inputs and resources collectively together, that, you know, they're societies of the commons, but also societies of household autonomy. There's a kind of autonomy and community, and they're always geared around, you know, what is generally the limiting factor in the local landscape, where you need to come together with other people and figure it out. So in some parts of the world, that's going to be fire risk, other parts water and irrigation, other parts soil. So, you know, there aren't a kind of blueprint that you can impose from on high. You know, these things have to be worked out locally in relation to local traditions, histories, and ecological forces. So to me, that's kind of a really key question that we all have to face locally, as Daniel was saying. How do we create secure and widespread access to productive land and to water? How do we build the skills and the capital, by which I don't mean the kind of abstract financialized global capital, but the local resources that we need to produce the food and the fiber and the other things that we need to live a congenial life? How do we do that, and how do we prevent it concentrating into few hands? You know, how do we make that democratically available for all? I think the great advantages of organizing production in that way are firstly, if we look to local production, to producing for ourselves at whatever level of ourself we're talking about, individuals, families, households, communities, we can relearn the value of enough. You know, we produce what we need and then stop. You know, we have a kind of global system that is kind of predicated on producing more, on economic growth, on kind of leveraging more profit, and it's actually beneficial, I think, for many of us to learn when enough is enough. You know, what the limits of the local system are, and that secondly gives us local ecological feedback. You know, it's very easy to displace onto nature or onto other people in parts of the world that you don't necessarily see the dysfunctions and the burdens and the miseries of our own consumption. So localization to me is actually, you know, we need that feedback. We need to be able to see the consequences of our action locally. So the big question is how we get there politically. We tend to have these modernist narratives of progress, whether of the left or the right, that kind of have a ready-made answer, you know, whether it's technological improvement, market discipline, market forces, or class organization. And I don't find any of those kind of narratives of inherent progress myself terribly convincing. Unfortunately, I think the way that we're going to confront this is through enormous crisis and chaos. I mean, climate change, I think, is almost certain to upend our world in numerous ways. Energy futures, deeply problematic, soil issues, water issues. And I think this is all going to lead to considerable population movements, both within and between countries, possibly from lower latitude to higher latitude countries, from urban areas to rural areas, from lower elevations to higher elevations. And that, I think, is potentially going to be associated with the waning legitimacy of centralized nation states that are kind of offering, you know, this kind of progress narrative, this technical narrative. It's not too hard to see the problems that can lead to, and I think, you know, already we're seeing all sorts of kind of ugly walls and barriers and nationalisms emerging. But I think there is potential. I mean, I think there's an enormous potential that people have to self-organize locally, and to do that really not. I mean, you have to embrace local histories, local traditions. You know, obviously are hugely varied around the world, and you know, it has to be done in sort of a knowledge of that and an embracing of those local histories. But I think increasingly we're, you know, the sort of notion of a kind of here first bounded local community is going to be problematic. You know, people are going to be on the move. You know, we have to do this locally, but we have to work it out collectively, globally. And I think, you know, we can release that energy and sort of develop a politics, a local politics to do that. I talk in my book about what I call the supersedure state, draw on traditions like civic republicanism, which is about how people can come together and define what they need in their community, sort of not on the basis of sort of prior status or prior identity, but sort of coming together collectively to solve problems. So, I mean, the challenges are enormous, but I think the, you know, the prize of a congenial, local, horticulturally based, long-term society is also there for us, and you know, we need to grasp onto it. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. I have plenty of things to talk about.
Thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for sharing that. And I just wanted to say that, you know, I don't have it with me, but in our center we have these signs, selfie boards. I love farmers. I just wanted to applaud that you're doing small scale farming in your community, Chris. It's wonderful to hear that. I want to now invite Helena Norberg-Hodge, who has been writing and speaking and working for decades on localization, and is a very dear friend. Helena, would you like to come and share a few reflections on what we've been hearing?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I want to say that Camilla's research in understanding what's going on at the global level and the need for us to look beyond just our national governments to understand the role of global corporations in shaping our national agendas is unique in the world. And I hope that those of you who are hearing her tonight will join Camilla and me for a conversation on the 19th. So there's an hour and a half long conversation where you can hear more from Camilla and a bit more from me too. She's got something like 3 PhDs. I think she's working on her 4th PhD right now. I'm begging her to get out of academia because we want to get this knowledge out much more widely. And unfortunately, academia is keeping things very tightly enclosed. I want to say that I've known, well, you know, Daniel now for something like 25 years or something, and I'm just thrilled about the way we're coming together in our view of things, and thrilled to hear your also now critique of the techno systems that we really do need to look at as being anti-life, and we need to be looking at how we change technology to be in the service of culture, in the service of societal prerogatives, instead of what's happening now, which is that the techno systems with this fake money from the casino are shaping culture, misshaping culture worldwide. And I also want to say that I'm a little bit nervous about using regenerative, because I've seen regenerative agriculture pushed as a concept with a lot of money behind it in the last few years. And I know that already now Nestle is proud of being regen. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the word regenerative. I completely agree with you, Daniel. We need to be looking at regenerative culture. But the problem is that when we're looking at agriculture today, regenerative is even, well, it's as vague as sustainable. We even now have seen how organic has been co-opted. Local is a little more difficult to co-opt, because we can start looking at how far did this food travel from the farm to the table. So we can start getting a little bit more concrete and specific. And I'm urging everyone to try to talk about more localized, diversified systems, and trying to get people to understand that when you shorten the distance between the market and the farm, you are actually creating a market that pressures farmers in the direction of diversification. And I do want to add to what you were saying, Chris, to say that our research and all our experience shows that you could take any 2 bits of land anywhere in the world, from the Tibetan plateau where we worked to the Sahara virtually, any 2 bits of land, and if you do diversity on one and monoculture on the other, you will always be able to produce much more from any given bit of soil and water. I think that's a fundamentally important fact that we need to be pushing out there really, really hard, which is why I believe a small farm future is the way forward. And I believe it needs to be agricultural, not just horticultural. Ideally, we need to have animals in the mix. And then the final thing I'd like to say is that for us, localization is also very much about the vital importance of rebuilding intergenerational community connections. So we haven't talked about that tonight, but it's very much part of the picture that's centrally important. Often today in the West, as people start discovering the need to come back to life, to come back to adapting our culture to the natural world, we end up talking very much about this green and deeply earth-centric view. And we often, as Camilla was saying, we're sort of demonizing the Anthropocene and basically demonizing humans. For us, really the problem is this top-down, structured monoculture, which started with genocide, enclosures, and slavery. So from the very outset, it broke up the fabric of intergenerational community and the fabric of deep connections to your place on the planet, to your local knowledge about specific species, specific areas of soil, and the adaptation to that natural reality, always diverse. So yeah, just a few comments, but I'm hoping there'll be some listeners who will stay with us for our whole program, because we of course want to elaborate on all these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena. So I'd invite people to place your questions in the chat box, in the Q&A special box. While we are waiting for some of those, I thought I would raise a question. As you know, we're hearing right now a lot about this new Green Deal and the Great Reset, and even the Sustainable Development Goals, and this is being sold to everybody as the way forward. So I know Camilla touched on it a little bit. Could you open up a little bit more your thoughts on these, and what are some of the critical questions we need to be asking around these solutions that are being put forth for the planet?
Okay, I think the first thing to be clear is that this Green New Deal, actually it's much older. You know, the initial ideas, they are even before the financial crisis of 2008. We have this kind of wording around, at least from 2006, some key documents already playing with that. Of course, you have to remind, I'm very great fan of history, you know, what the original New Deal was all about, and which role the New Deal, the first one, played in helping to establish the US hegemony in the world in the 20th century, and its relation to finance mechanism and how the whole rebuilding of Europe. I mean, it's a long story. But if you look today at the strategy, the largest strategy we have so far, which is the European one, it's so clearly anchored in changing agriculture, in introducing as sustainable agriculture the payment for environmental services, the direct payment schemes, in financializing assets as biodiversity, carbon, water, habitat banking, biodiversity offsets, you name it. It also combines the selling of this package of digital transformation of agriculture for drones, for monitoring, geofencing, for also keeping the cattle out of the places that they want to protect. Automating a lot of increasing automation, and I know this is going to get complicated, but I'm researching in Berlin now at the Humboldt University, and I am in the agricultural economics department, and it's impressive to see how many projects they have, all highly corporate sponsored, regarding indoors agriculture that is called soilless agriculture. That is this whole narrative around making agriculture climate proof. So you actually produce food in those big tables that have the nutrients and some kind of substrate. You also have finance and projects going on for vertical agriculture to make it more intensive under artificial lights. Then Siemens is a great player on that. Agriculture inside containers. This is a big trend in China too. And because we're thinking through how capitalism is evolving, we have to think through the contradictions. So yes, we need more labor intensive. We need to bring agriculture closer to us, but the kind of the solution that is being offered, at least the one that has the scientific studies to back off the numbers and the profitability and why you should or not or should not mainstream it as a public policy. So use public money for it. It's all inside, moving on this larger narrative. Nobody talks about, for instance, land reform, because if you're really going to be serious about shifting agriculture, we need to talk about seed banks, about what we are going to do to phase out all the GMOs that are already there, many more things. What is going on about privatization of water and sanitation, and how you promote this irrigated agriculture, but under new schemes. We have to address reality. That is, the world of food retailing has changed dramatically over the COVID, since the COVID started, with everybody going online for grocery. Not everybody, no, but it's a big consumer trend to order food, the ghost kitchens taking over. So I think this is all scheduled for some more longer conversation that we could set for another day. But I think also, Manish, you just to say something about the SDGs, and I'm from a group in Latin America that has been for over a decade criticizing development. We are the ones against the development narrative, and how the development imaginary has created this political dispositif that we cannot even think and talk about what kind of future we want without referring to this development. As Manish knows me for quite a while, he knows that I always say it's from the South, and I'm from Brazil, it's It's been horrible to grow up hearing that somebody is already developed, some country, and I happened to be born in a country that was not yet there. I was behind, I was lacking something to be equal, the people who already made it. And it's so obvious if we look at the history of the entire modernity, as we call it in the West, has been built upon, the colonial structure, extracting resources, enslaving people, this is now it's becoming mainstream, even worrisome mainstream. And so for us, it's kind of odd how we had first the Millennium Development Goals that were quite criticized. And then we had like the celebration of this stupid, I say the 17 tokens of the now Sustainable Development Goals, and it's presented in this gamified interface, all colorful with little draws, and it's highly ideological. I mean, the 17th goal is partnership for the goals. So it's a way of naturalizing public-private partnerships and the role that corporations will have in this redefined multilateral system, because as you mentioned, the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution. One key thing in this agenda, it's what it's called stakeholder capitalism. So we are in an era right now where we cannot count only on nation states. We need to bring the non-state actors into the negotiation table. That means Unilever, Shell, Nestle, Toyota, and Duke Energy. This is the kind of global governance that is being shaped. And through this SDGs that looks so inoffensive and so friendly, actually you are proposing the interface where you are financializing social rights. So corporations, instead of paying governments taxes, and then we spend money with transactional cost that is paying for, to have a public infrastructure to decide where this money is going to go, the corporations will actually invest in empowering women and girls, in circularity, in all kinds, in climate action, is everything that is so nicely put there. But when we look at closer and you look at the indicators, it's all tied to the financialization process and the new kind of financial assets that are being brought to the global casino. And I'm going to stop there because I think, overextended myself.
No problem. Thanks. Chris and Daniel, would you like to add on to this conversation? I think what Camilla's raising is, how do we resist this, corporate tech, hyper technologization, and privatization of this whole system, and how do we, reclaim power in communities again while this is happening? Daniel, Chris, would you like to say something in this conversation?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm just, on the one hand, I'm really excited that there's such a razor-sharp analysis of what goes on as a clearly observable process that Camilla is offering us. And on the other hand, there's a little bit in me that is just how do we bring forward the people in a lot of these organizations. Like, I've worked with lots of people working on SDGs in NGOs around the globe, trying to use this platform of conversation as an entry point to then go deeper, to shift, to critique SDG number 8 as the Trojan horse that still promotes growth as the engine of creating a more sustainable world, which is ridiculous. But it's in a similar way as, can we redefine growth? Can we redefine development? Like, regenerative in its essence is about the evolutionary process of life. And it is in one way a developmental process. And there are some forms of growth that are also in life and living systems essential. And there are people in all of those organizations, NGOs, governments, even the large corporations, that I know personally, who I actually believe in a fully perceived, embodied, deeper knowing of these people, that they're not bad people, that they're not doing this even consciously, that they're also being somewhat duped into promoting a narrative they're not fully conscious of. And how do we have this conversation without demonizing the people and only naming the structural dysfunctionality and structural violence that is embedded in the system that these people are indirectly or directly promoting, but still pick them up as human beings who are part of life, life is now so under threat that it's actually life itself that comes through us as a regenerative impulse. And it's coming through Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivet-Karnak, who are lovely human individuals. But to some extent, you could say they're probably very much involved in also promoting a lot of the agendas that we're so expertly now taking a closer look at.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, just a few quick remarks. I mean, sort of raising the idea of the New Deal is kind of interesting because, you know, if we go back to Roosevelt's New Deal, there was a very kind of minor and subordinate part of that was kind of about land reform and making making local land available to people, and you know, there's that kind of making you know, Black and Indigenous farmers in particular being able to access land, but it was kind of, that was sort of swept by the wayside in relation to kind of big scale industrial development, and obviously the, you know, the war and that whole sort of growth period after the war has sort of so dominated our thinking, and that, you know, I think we need to, you know, we're now in a situation where I think that kind of industrial growth engine is faltering. You know, we can't sustain that type of growth model. We can't really decouple, you know, the kind of industrial development that we're familiar with from sort of climate breakdown and other dysfunctions. And that takes us back to the issue of development that I thought, you know, Camilla was discussing very nicely, is that, again, it's one of those words, like all of these words, sustainability, regenerative, agroecology, they kind of get co-opted. And, you know, development, you know, what we really need is for people to be able to locally and democratically determine what development means for themselves, you know, not have some kind of global model of development imposed, you know, upon them in terms of, you know, very conventional understandings of sort of industrial development, economic growth, and so on. So, you know, there, as Daniel was saying, I mean, I talk about it a bit in my book, you know, there's, you know, that we can use more organic metaphors of development, of kind of development in place. But yeah, land reform, you know, is absolutely critical. You know, I mean, one of the things I find really encouraging is that when I got into farming 20 odd years ago, you know, there was still this narrative that, oh, you know, nobody wants to farm anymore. And, you know, there's this kind of bizarre thing where more or less, you know, any other economic sector, if you talk about creating jobs in it, people think it's a good thing. Whereas farming, you know, the whole narrative has been about getting labor out of farming. But I think that's changing. And I mean, I'm encouraged by the number of young, dynamic people who are getting interested in food and farming. The big problem they face is access to land, and that's to do with, you know, all of these issues of the fictitious capital and the sort of capitalization of land values. So we absolutely need a political movement about land reform, about, you know, unlocking access to land and making it available for people to determine development for themselves in their local communities. And, you know, that's, I think, what a New Deal, a Green New Deal should be about. But again, it's being a little bit kind of co-opted into a sort of narrative about renewable energy and sort of replacing, you know, fossil energy with, you know, with newer forms of energy that can essentially enable business as usual. And, you know, that is something I think we need to resist, that narrative.
Thanks, Chris. Helena, do you want to say anything about this?
I would like to let people know that you, Manish, grew up mainly in America, studied at Harvard, ended up working with the UN and in finance, and then you realized that this top-down, centralized monocultural system was destructive, and you went to learn from your illiterate grandmother in Rajasthan. I think that really summarizes in a way what we're talking about. The amazing knowledge that your illiterate grandmother held in knowing her place, in understanding the specifics of the land, the water, this particular species. We now know that the only seed bank is actually the regeneration and continual planting of these heirloom adapted varieties of plants and animals. And so you hold great wisdom about this whole development debate. And I'm glad we're going to hear also more from you as a speaker in our program. I guess I would also like to add that maybe just simply to say that we keep hammering on about the fact that governments are using key mechanisms to shape the direction of development and growth or progress. And these are what they tax, what they subsidize, and what they regulate. And what we're seeing is that every place-based activity, and that's even at the national level, is being regulated and squeezed for taxes, while the global monopolies are being deregulated, systematically deregulated through trade treaties. Right now, the UK is signing a deal with Australia about importing beef from Australia. And do you hear much in the media about the madness of importing beef from the other side of the world? And again, the economic as well as ecological illiteracy about the impact of these trade treaties, that for us is one of the biggest main causes of our problems. And so again, we need to build up a movement that will be both economically and ecologically literate enough to be arguing that those mechanisms, the taxes, subsidies, and regulations, need to be shifted to support less energy intensive, massively less energy intensive, and let's call it job rich rather than labor intensive. Less energy intensive, job rich ways forward. That we could do much more easily than continuing down the path that we're going now, that we are being pushed to go against all the clear demands from the bottom up. People don't want this, but we are being pushed and pulled in this direction. And the end result is massively increased addiction, mental illness, suicide among young people. We are not doing well. So development and progress in this formula, taking us further and further away from place, from our natural home and connections to nature and one another, being removed from that is causing massive human suffering, both in terms of mental health, but also physical health. So yeah, I hope that we'll be encouraging people to think about that bigger picture, help to lobby in the sense of talking to one another. Right now, I don't see much hope in trying to address our so-called representatives. We need to be having this dialogue across the divisions of climate here, poverty there, water here, biodiversity here. No, let's come together to understand that the structural economic path that's taking us towards this globalized techno future is at every level destructive, and we need to be starting to move in the other direction. So that's my little addition.
Thanks, Helena. Thanks. I also wanted to just maybe to continue the dialogue. I think one thing we're seeing here in many parts of the world is this, a lot of the agenda has been shaped towards individual behavior change, compost your health, which are all great, spiritual acts. But I think maybe people would want to comment, how do we go beyond that? Or what do you feel, is that enough just to do our turn off our lights, buy our CFL bulbs and all of that, drive our hybrids? But what do people feel about that? And how do we move beyond that agenda? Because I think that, Helena, have discussed a lot, is, feeds really into this corporate agenda. And so maybe, what can we do more at the community level? I'd like to hear from people. And the other thing we see a lot of is this polarization, like really extreme polarization. And so where's the bridge that we can start to come together as communities around? I think if you can share your experiences around that.
I can go. Yeah, I think that's the question always comes, what can I do apart from buying maybe local food, or people think organic food is enough. But and I think that's a voice that I heard Helena represent for a long time, that both things are important. Yes, it's good that we look at our own habits and change them, but we need that global analysis and the global understanding. What I'm noticing is I'm just in my own personal life recently finally landed in a place that I'm now committed to as a custodian for the long term, is that my attention isn't necessarily going on the land that I'm on as much as on who are my neighbors and what can I do with my neighbors to create the container that gives me, in our busy worlds, we can make the intention of I want to have a better relationship with my neighbors. But if we don't set up a collaboration with the neighbors that gives us a rhythm of meeting them regularly, then we have that intention for years and it doesn't happen. So I'm dreaming into how can I get my neighbors involved in opening up the fences and creating a community-supported agro-forestry system on the little hill that we're on, that includes my land, but also my immediate neighbors' lands, and that might even generate the job of another person who becomes our farmer, and whatever we overproduce, we sell to our wider neighbors to support that person's salary and this project. And that's the beginning of a conversation that then can lead to creating a community microgrid on renewable energy and give us not just food sovereignty, but energy sovereignty. And to look at, is it really sensible that I don't have one, but my neighbors have swimming pools? Maybe we should all have one pool to go swimming, and it will be cheaper for all of us and would be more water efficient. It's these kind of looking at individual behavior changes, but how can we make them more a community behavior change, and not seeing that as, oh, that's too much work, but seeing that as the vital investment into the human relationships and connections that will allow us to weather the probably rather bumpy next 2-3 decades as we begin to come back to life.
Thanks, Daniel.
Shall I speak
Chris?
to that from? I mean, just from just in terms of activities that I've been involved. I mean, it's an intractable question. How do I? At what point do I sort of try and try and enter this system and change it? I mean, I think, and I think I share the skepticism about, so-called green consumerism. I mean, I think perhaps the best thing is not to alter your consumer behavior, but to think of ways of not being a consumer. And that can be, I mean, not totally, obviously, but that can be something, rather than, if you're living in a flat in a high-rise block, that might be growing some herbs on the windowsill rather than buying them in the shop. But I think more importantly, I think as Daniel was just saying, it's about organizing locally. So, organizing community food growing, looking at local spaces, which you can try and repurpose for food. And that immediately then, starts a conversation and sort of engages people politically. Here in the UK, local authorities are supposed to provide allotments if there's a demand for people to be able to to grow, to use local authority land to grow food. So that's a pressure that can be brought to bear. There's a whole narrative that kind of small scale sustainable food production is a kind of middle class luxury, and obviously the sort of the dynamics of energy and labor and food pricing. And by the way, thanks Helena for that great job rich idea. I'm going to use that in future all the time instead of labor intensive. But there's that narrative that it's a kind of middle class luxury. So one thing we do is what we call a solidarity box. So customers who feel, who are a little bit wealthier and are willing to sort of pay forward, pay a little bit more for their box, so that then we can produce vegetables at a lower price for people who otherwise couldn't afford it. Or I'm involved in organizations like the Land Workers Alliance, which is connected internationally with La Via Campesina, so a political take on food production for food producers, or the Ecological Land Co-op here in the UK, and other similar ventures, which is trying to make land available for small scale new entrant farmers that's kind of affordable and doesn't float at kind of speculative values of market prices. I mean, all of these things ultimately, they feel like such a drop in the ocean compared to what's needed, but they're all ways of getting people talking about food systems, engaging people politically, and getting people working with other people locally to provide for themselves things that otherwise they would be relying on more mainstream market routes. And I think that's incredibly important, just to find whatever those little things might be that you can do. That those are the sorts of places to look.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to bring in some of the questions that are being shared. So Till Hopstock, I don't know where Till's from, but she's asking, or they're asking, I should say, what are the number one ideas to talk about with my friends in the city to invite them to see that localization is absolutely necessary and that they are not powerless, that they can do something even within the city? And she later asks how to make people see all the problems that we face systemically related to the destruction of local structures. What are the best, most clearly comprehensive entry points for people who believe that there is no alternative for them beyond going to the supermarket, chain store, and ordering at Amazon?
I'd like to say, I'd like to say that we, forever trying to point out that many of the local food initiatives have started from the cities. So one of the main things you can do is to look around. You may well find that there are already some groups starting community gardens, or even more importantly, farmers markets that link the farmers in the region with the city. This movement of that linking up between the city and the region has been growing over the last 30 years. And we've been pioneers of that in many different countries. And it's so satisfying to see that most of these initiatives tend to go from strength to strength. So that has been the core, the base of this localization movement. When people then go on to build on that, to sometimes support other businesses, small, authentic, and businesses that are providing useful things, not just plastic toys and fashion, but there are also local business alliances, and then there are local finance schemes. And if you listen to our program over the week, you'll hear more about that. But again and again, we're finding that people who get involved in the local food movement, even from the city, find it so energizing and so inspiring that it often enables them to feel both hope for the future and start coming together with a community group to look at the bigger picture and to start thinking about, as I say, how they can build on that, both in terms of taking community initiatives, but as I also keep saying, hopefully to start building a collective voice for the need for policy change. Because we must remember that the food in the supermarket is only cheap because our governments are subsidizing old food from far away and making fresh food from a mile away artificially expensive. These subsidies are built into the entire system. It actually has to do with what's been happening at schools, what's been happening at universities. And so it's more than direct subsidies just in the ag sector. But yeah, I guess that's the, I think the most important thing that you can do is look out for either existing initiatives or help to start them.
Can I add something? I think just because so many interesting things have already been said, but I think we need to be really careful with this moralizing of consumption, because it's now in the bloodstream of our culture, no? That a new generation, especially what is called the millennials, I don't like this kind of dividing people, segmenting them, using the marketing, you know, when we are born or what kind of consumer profile you have. But there is a global subjectivity forged around what is to be a millennial. I'm not a millennial, so I can see the difference, you know, maybe because they are already a generation born into this digital world, not like me. And so it's, for them, it's so important to acknowledge themselves through the identity of as a consumer, you know. And something that really annoys me as someone from the south, living in Europe, is that you go to the supermarket, maybe too much in Germany, because they are especially obsessive about it. And then you have, when you want to brand something as sustainable, you have all those layers of certification, and we know how mythical they are. But now you add that to, oh, this is the poor family in the Rajasthan. This is the single mother in the forest in Brazil. Oh, this is the, you know, the Black community in Colombia. And it's like you buy something that you want, that actually comes through this international crazy trade that Helena was mentioning, because it's all regarding coffee, chocolate, you know, nice spicy things and ingredients that they don't grow in Europe. And then you feel nice because thanks to you having that money to buy the coconut milk, you know, €4 a little can. Oh, you were helping them to be a part of this world, you know. And maybe you find it strange and it's not a shared perception, but I don't like to see all those faces. And it's worse when they, oh, this is Katie, this is Isabel. They put the first names as trying to fake this kind, this human to human interaction through the commodities, not through real solidarity, that are actually, when you look at the little fine print, all those nice brands that appear as diverse, they have been all already bought by the big conglomerates. But then the big logo is not visible. It's little, very small. No? So I think this is one thing to watch, because this is something a lot of people get, have nice intentions, but they are very seduced by this, this packaging narrative and this saving the world through, you know, eating and consuming things. But the worst part, and that it gets very political, it's how this whole carbon neutrality, you know, I'm obsessed about the carbon thing, but it's the modern equivalent of the medieval indulgences. When the Catholic faith was selling indulgences for your sins, you could pay if you had the money, and then you would be neutral. You would not have to live with this nightmare of going to the purgatory, no, and not going straight to heaven. And now you can say, no, I'm neutral. I have this, I buy my energy from this provider and it's clean, so I'm zero. No, you are not. No, and this gives the people this sense of well-being, and I think we have to address, because this is in another conversation also, because this is not something that we can dismiss, as it's already so embedded in our culture and is so much a part of this new consumer sensibility. And so I don't want to be rude to anyone or to offend, because of course people have been led to think this way, but it's a new way of updating old schemes of using money to buy out your moral action and your ethical path. And if you want to have a truly humane and south and north and south conversation, we need to go over this, this daily habit of just shopping around the world you want. It's more complicated than that. You really need to, as has been said, engage in not calling stuff through the Amazon, not ordering through the apps, and then go to build what is real, what is there, what is at the human scale.
Thanks, Camilla. We have a few minutes left, so I just want to put one more question out there and then give everyone a chance for your last 1 minute closing words. So Siddharth from India is just raising this question: is not man as a whole internally conflicted, corrupted, divided, insensitive, greedy, that has brought about systems that manifest the same? Can any system that is manifested of such a mind not bring about chaos, no matter how utopian it sounds? So is it not important to understand and go to the root which all these divisive and exploitive systems have emanated, that man himself? So this is the one, I just put that out there, but closing words from each person, 1 minute each, please. Daniel, do you want to go?
Well, okay, I'll pick up on this. Let's not bedevil our species, really. We have over millennia nurtured ecosystems into higher states of abundance and productivity. The science is clear that the Colombian and the Peruvian rainforest have been co-created by inhabitants that understood themselves as expressions of that forest, of that place. And we can come back to that. Then even the Pacific Northwest is the data now that also these forests have basically been, human creation would be overstating it, but human co-creation and mutuality with the wider community of life is exactly what evolved us as a species. What we're needing to understand is that we need to come back to 98% of how we survived as a species, the long journey, and understand the aberration of the last 5,000 to 8,000 years, and particularly the last 500 to 250 years, as the exception, as where we've lost the path. We can create conditions conducive to life because we are life. And that's the central theme of this. And I'm going to say it again. We're coming back to life, and this changes everything.
Thanks, Daniel. Chris?
Yeah, a couple of quick observations. Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with what Daniel just said, but I mean, I think most long-term human traditions, religious traditions, are aware of human contradiction, and and they're aware of the fact that there are times to be greedy and there are times to tighten the belt. There are times when we can feast, and times when we need to not to do that. We've kind of lost track of that a little bit, I think, in conditions of modernity. I talk about it a little bit in my book, but yeah, I think most long-term human traditions have found ways to kind of embrace the contradictions of being human, and we need to do that. One of those contradictions, in relation to another question, is urbanism. Big cities are very much based on a kind of extractive, drawing in resource model. We need to figure out ways to skim ecological flows, not to mine them, and that is absolutely how we need to think about ourselves in place in that context.
Thanks, Chris. Camilla?
Yes, I think our common struggle is to refuse and resist this high-tech hijacking of evolution. We are biological beings, and we have to reclaim the biological reality of the world. We need for this to re-signify carbon, as has been said here, because carbon is the basic of all life forms. It's what commons to life. We do not, it's either or. Either we have a carbon-based world, or you are going towards the silicon life forms and the silicon future. And then I end with something me and Helena, we discussed it some other day. There are two paths in the future. It's either you are seduced with the future that we are going to dance with the robots, or you rather dance with humans. And I'm on the second one.
And I just want to add to that I hope that people will listen to our conversation, Camilla, and also, as Henry just pointed out in the chat box, the conversation with Gabor Mate that I had the other day, that's excellent. And that, again, what we're looking at is this long term on the planet that human beings have been around. We're talking about the pre-modern Chris, and there we're talking about every day more evidence of, as Daniel was also saying, of our ability to sustain life and to, to essentially, I don't want to say enrich it, we don't know, but we managed to live for more than 99% of our time on this planet without destroying biodiversity, without destroying ourselves. So let's learn from that. And that for me is ancient futures. That's what my book is also about, ancient futures.
Thank you, Helena. There was one last thing before we go. Camilla, people are asking how they can access some of your work. Also, Chris and Daniel, can you maybe share a link for everybody before we close, how they can access your work, guys?
I shared the link for the carbon metrics, which was a brochure that was from 2015, but it's quite accessible because it's has been written to a general public. And hopefully for the next year, I will have a book coming out with some synthesis, because I'm very lazy to actually get something out. I'm better off speaking, but I think it's needed. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think
Camilla, you should have a weekly website.
In the chat box, Camilla's website or her institute is also linked, and there are lots of links to my Medium blog that people can find 560 articles on.
Great, thank you.
I just put my blog in the chat there, so yeah, you can access stuff from there and my book and so on. Small Farm Future.
Thank you. So. Thank you, guys. This was amazing to be with you. And I think this is going to be a really fun and exciting and really heart and mind expanding week coming up. We hope to see you on more of the sessions. Thank you, everyone.
Manish, I'll thank you to finish. And also for all the things that are going on in India. There will be lots of examples of various activities building the movement in India, also in Japan. Very exciting to see what's going on in 30 countries as part of this whole World Localization Day program, which is lasting over several weeks. The actual day is the 20th, but over more than a month, there are activities going on all around the world. So stay tuned, everybody. Yeah. Thank you all again.
First a month of localization, and then the entire year. That's our dream. Great. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.